Story recapped here. Today I'm gonna explain a horror and thriller film called X. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. In Houston, Texas in 1979, an adult film actress named Maxine Minks decides to go on a road trip with her producer boyfriend Wayne to shoot an adult movie. Two more actors, Bobby Lynn and Jackson Hole, are excited to be with them, and the director RJ brings his girlfriend along, Lorraine. Later on, the group stops by a gas station to pick up some snacks for the road. While inside the store, Maxine tells Wayne she wants to be famous, but he wants her to be patient. However, Maxine can't wait any longer, saying she deserves nice things. So Wayne assures her he'll help her get anything she desires, pointing out she has what it takes to be famous. Meanwhile, Bobby Lynn asks Lorraine if she always helps RJ with all his films, so she says she sometimes does. Then they start filming Jackson, and Bobby Lynn even teaches RJ how to get a good shot. While paying inside the store, Wayne and Maxine watch the evangelist as he delivers a sermon on television. Finally, Maxine's group leaves, but they get caught in a traffic jam because a truck accidentally ran over a cow. Moments later, the group eventually arrives at the farm where they're supposed to shoot. Wayne gets out of the vehicle to talk to the farm owner, Howard, while on the other hand, Lorraine expresses her disappointment that RJ is trying to make a dirty movie. Then, when Howard sees Wayne, he takes his gun and points it at him, thinking he's a trespasser. However, Wayne explains that they already spoke on the phone days ago, and when the old man remembers it, he finally greets his guest properly. After that, everyone prepares to go inside the house, and Maxine notices Howard's wife, Pearl, standing by the window. Then Howard leads them to the farmhouse, where they'll stay until they finish the film. There, Howard informs them it was built for soldiers during the Civil War, and when he asks Wayne if he served, Jackson answers and shares he did 2 tours in South Vietnam. Howard then notices Maxine, saying he doesn't recall Wayne mentioning he'd be bringing company, but Wayne just gives him cash to let them stay. Unfortunately, that doesn't stop Howard from expressing how much he dislikes them, asking for a little discretion for his wife before leaving. Once Howard is gone, Lorraine realizes that the old man doesn't know about what they'll do. Wayne admits it and intends to keep it that way, and as soon as he sees Howard leaving the farm, he tells the group to prepare for filming. Moments later, the camera starts rolling, and Bobby Lynn and Jackson go first. RJ is determined to make a decent movie and keeps teaching Bobby Lynn what to do, so Jackson tells him to stay in his lane and let him do all the work. Meanwhile, Maxine goes out for a walk in the woods. She then finds a lake and decides to swim, unaware that Pearl is watching her from afar. Maxine stays in the water for a few minutes, not realizing there's an alligator nearby. Luckily, the reptile doesn't catch up to her when she gets out of the water. Back in the farmhouse, Bobby Lynn and Jackson finally finish filming. Jackson is proud of himself for doing a great job, but Bobby Lynn reminds him that they were just acting. Later on, Maxine notices Pearl watching her as she's about to return to the farmhouse. The old woman weakly gestures for Maxine to follow her, and even though she's reluctant, Maxine enters Pearl and Howard's house. Inside, Maxine looks for Pearl and ends up in the dirty kitchen. Then Pearl finally shows up and offers Maxine some lemonade, scaring her a bit. So Maxine immediately drains her glass and tells Pearl she needs to get back to work. However, on their way out, Pearl shows Maxine her wedding picture, expressing sadness about how she used to be young once. She also talks about Howard serving during the war, pointing out there was nothing he wouldn't do for her back then. After that, Pearl makes Maxine look at herself in the mirror and touches her skin, making her flinch. Pearl then tells Maxine to leave when Howard returns, telling her it'll be their little secret even though the young woman has no idea what she's talking about. Making sure that Howard won't see her, Maxine waits for the old man to enter the house before running for the farmhouse. He then runs into Wayne, who's already pissed since he's been looking everywhere for her. So Maxine immediately goes inside and takes some substance to calm herself down. After that, Maxine films her scene with Jackson in the barn while everyone watches. On the other hand, Howard realizes that someone has been inside their home, while Pearl decides to wear makeup and goes to the farmhouse. There, she eagerly watches from the window as Maxine makes love to Jackson, imagining she's in the young woman's place. That night, Pearl returns to their house and dances slowly for Howard, trying to seduce him into sleeping with her. However, the old man refuses because of his weak heart, leaving Pearl disappointed. Meanwhile, Maxine calls Lorraine out for staring at her. Lorraine then asks Wayne if he feels weird watching Maxine do the deed with Jackson, so Wayne says it's just business. At the same time, Maxine and Bobby Lynn point out that sleeping with other people is just normal. Then, they toast to achieving their dreams before Jackson plays the guitar and Bobby Lynn sings. Meanwhile, Pearl can't help but feel dejected as she looks at herself in the mirror. She's no no longer the beautiful dancer she once was, and there's nothing she can do about it. On the other hand, Lorraine tells everyone she wants to do a scene in the movie, but of course, RJ refuses to let her participate, and no matter what Lorraine says to convince him, he just can't be swayed. So Wayne talks to RJ outside, trying to explain that Lorraine will do whatever she wants. RJ only becomes upset and says Lorraine isn't like Maxine and Bobby Lynn, adding that she's a nice girl. However, his comment offends Wayne, so Wayne tells him how wrong he is. Inside the farmhouse, Maxine and Bobby Lynn help Lorraine prepare for her part in the movie. RJ returns a few minutes later, but he doesn't talk to his girlfriend and just films her scene with Jackson. Everyone goes to bed after that, but RJ takes a shower first, crying that Lorraine just slept with someone else. Then he takes the van keys and starts to drive away, but he stops when he finds Pearl standing in the middle of the path. Confused, RJ tries to make sure the old woman is okay, but Pearl just hugs him and tries to kiss him. However, RJ pulls back and suggests they find Howard. Unfortunately, Pearl stabs him in the neck without warning, leaving him staggering before collapsing. Then, Pearl gets on top of RJ and stabs him repeatedly, feeling alive for the first time in years. Pearl slowly dances after that, trying to relive her youth. She dances to a piece of music only she can hear, and then she takes the keys to the vehicle. Meanwhile, Lorraine notices that RJ is not in bed, so she goes out to look for him around the house, but she doesn't find him anywhere. Eventually, she realizes that her boyfriend went out, but Wayne startles her before she can do anything. Lorraine informs Wayne that RJ is gone, thinking that he left her because he's mad she participated in the film. However, Wayne points out that the van is still there, telling Lorraine that RJ is probably just processing things. But Lorraine still feels bad for hurting RJ, saying she doesn't want the relationship to come to an end. So Wayne assures her she didn't do anything wrong and says RJ will get over it, adding that he only needs to toughen up. Despite Wayne's assurance, Lorraine still asks him to help her find RJ because she's worried. Annoyed, Wayne goes with Lorraine even though he's only wearing his underwear. Wayne then searches for RJ in the barn while Lorraine asks Howard about her boyfriend when she sees the old man come out of their house. However, Howard doesn't answer her question and instead asks if she's seen his wife. Back in the barn, Wayne lectures RJ about his relationship with Lorraine, thinking the guy is listening to him in the dark. Unfortunately, he fails to notice the nail protruding from a small piece of wood on the ground and steps on it, leaving him screaming in pain. He then uses a small light to inspect his foot before pulling the nail, calling out to RJ to help him. At the same time, Wayne notices someone outside the barn door, thinking it might be RJ or Lorraine, so he walks toward the door and peeks through the holes, but he sees nobody there. However, he manages to get a glimpse of Pearl before the old woman impales him with a pitchfork. On the other hand, Howard lets Lorraine inside their house as he gets a flashlight and instructs her to get another one in the cellar. Of course, Lorraine is hesitant to go down there, but Howard begs her and says he's really worried about Pearl. With no choice, Lorraine heads to the cellar despite being afraid and immediately returns upstairs once she finds the flashlight. However, she soon realizes that Howard locked the door, so Lorraine goes back to the cellar and turns on the light, and that's when she finds the dead body of a man chained by the wrist. Sadly, the man has his pants down, and he's already starting to decompose. In the barn, Pearl makes sure that Wayne really is dead before covering his body with hay. Meanwhile, Jackson wakes up after hearing something and looks toward the door. Soon, Bobby Lynn wakes up too, wondering why Jackson got up. So Jackson tells her he thought he heard something, but he's not sure what it was. Then, he tells Bobby Lynn to go back to sleep before going to the living room to investigate. A few minutes later, Jackson notices Howard outside and asks him what's wrong, learning that Pearl is missing. Howard tells him that Pearl gets confused, and it sometimes happens after dark. Concerned, Jackson offers to help Howard find Pearl and quietly returns to the room to get dressed, unaware that he's being watched. After that, it is revealed that the person watching Jackson is Pearl, who goes straight to Maxine's room. There, Pearl undresses before joining a sleeping Maxine in bed, careful not to wake her up. Then Pearl softly touches Maxine's body and savors the moment, relishing the feeling of the young woman's skin against hers. At the same time, Jackson and Howard search for Pearl near the lake, where Jackson suggests splitting up to cover more ground. Then Jackson discovers a car submerged in the lake while looking for the old woman, and soon, he finds Howard's flashlight in the water and thinks he drowned. On the other hand, Unfolded, Lorraine bangs on the cellar door while shouting for help. However, when she realizes no one is coming, she goes to Howard's workbench and takes an axe to use on the door. Meanwhile, Jackson gets scared when he sees Howard alive and well, talking about how he can't give Pearl what she wants anymore. He then tells Jackson he doesn't understand what it's like since he can still do whatever he wants, leaving the guy wondering what he's talking about. So Howard reveals that the last man who stayed there was just like them, traipsing around in barely any clothes, enticing Pearl. Despite that, Jackson chooses to ignore Howard and suggests they return to the house, but the old man has other plans and shoots him without warning. Meanwhile, Maxine wakes up and realizes Pearl is beside her, causing her to scream and wake up Bobby Lynn. Concerned, Bobby Lynn quickly heads to Maxine's room and comes across an undressed Pearl in the hallway, startling her. Then once Pearl is gone, Bobby Lynn enters Maxine's room and finds her crying, also shouting that the old woman was in her bed touching her. At the same time, Lorraine finally creates an opening on the door using the axe and tries to unlock it, but Howard arrives and repeatedly hits her hand with his gun, breaking her fingers. He also points his firearm at Lorraine and tells her to return to the cellar and be quiet, turning on the television to drown her screams with the evangelist's sermon. Back in the farmhouse, Maxine uses some substance again to calm herself down. On the other hand, Bobby Lynn looks for Jackson and the others and eventually ends up by the lake, where she finds Pearl standing at the dock. She then approaches and covers Pearl with a blanket, urging the old woman to come with her to the house. However, Pearl suddenly slaps her and accuses her of being promiscuous, pissed that Bobby Lynn gets to flaunt her body. Then, Pearl pushes Bobby Lynn into the lake, where an alligator attacks her. It isn't long before Howard shows up and watches with Pearl as the predator devours Bobby Lynn, revealing he's aware of his wife's behavior. Concurrently, Maxine cleans herself up before searching for her friends. However, when she sees Howard and Pearl coming from the woods, she decides to hide. Howard and Pearl then enter the farmhouse and search for Maxine, talking about the others they already killed. At the same time, Howard mentions he locked up Lorraine in the house for Pearl, but his wife makes it clear she wants Maxine because they're both sick of not getting what they want. So even though he has a weak heart, Howard decides to give Pearl what she wants by making love to her just to make her feel special. Meanwhile, Maxine quietly moves under the bed and crawls toward the door before running for the van. Unfortunately, Maxine realizes that a knife is sticking out of the tire, and she also finds RJ's dead body on the ground. Then Maxine hears Lorraine crying for help inside the old couple's house, so she quickly takes the gun from the glove compartment and searches for her. Soon, Maxine finds Lorraine and lets her out of the cellar, but the girl blames her for what happened to her and leaves. However, Howard shoots Lorraine as she flees, forcing Maxine to hide. They then start to get rid of the body and plan to make it look like self-defense once they get questioned by the cops, determined not to leave a mess behind. On the other hand, Maxine listens to them as they talk about dumping the dead bodies into the water. A few minutes later, Howard drags Lorraine's body inside the house, but the girl suddenly moves and startles the old man, giving him a heart attack. Pearl panics as she tries to help her husband, so Maxine uses that opportunity to intimidate the old woman into telling her where the keys to the truck are. Pearl then tells Maxine the keys are in the kitchen, so Maxine immediately takes them. After that, she tells Pearl they'll rot for what they've done, but the old woman just insults her for being an adult film actress and says she'll end up just like her. Pissed, Maxine tries shooting Pearl, but she discovers that the gun is not loaded. Pearl then picks up Howard's shotgun and attempts to shoot Maxine, only to miss and be thrown out of the house because of the blast. Moments later, Maxine goes out and looks at Pearl while she lies on the ground with a broken hip, ignoring her as she asks for help. Then, Maxine runs Pearl over and smashes her head before finally leaving. Meanwhile, back in Howard and Pearl's house, the evangelist on television shows the audience a picture of Maxine, revealing she's his daughter who was lured into a life of sin. At the same time, the cops arrive to investigate what happened there, and as one of them gives the sheriff RJ's camera, they try to guess what's in it.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.